Amen. Glad to see everybody here tonight. I hope you have had a good day. We had a good day at my house. Celebrate Father's Day with a dad getting an afternoon nap. And that's hadn't happened in a long time on Sunday, so that was enjoyable. And one of Carla's coworkers has a 7-week-old little girl and got to visit with her and her parents for a little while this afternoon. So it's been a great day, and I hope you've had a good day as well. Go ahead and open your Bibles to 1 John 3. I had intended to open the lesson in a little different way, but that last song that David led, even if we don't like the tune to a song, which I love the tune to that song, but if you ever just pay attention to the words and what a song is saying. In our Bible class this morning, we were looking at this text, and David, the words of that song just fit in perfectly. And we were asking the question in class this morning is, what is our motivation for living the Christian life? And this is such an important reminder. 1 John chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It says, "Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us." And we were talking about in our class this morning, the NIV actually uses the word lavished. Behold what manner of love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us because it did not know him. And beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be. But we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure. What is our motivation for the Christian walk? I was watching a TV show this week and paying attention to a debate on that show between the atheist and the Christian characters. And the atheist basically made the point that if in our lives our motivation for being a Christian is either a reward for heavenly streets of gold or solely the fear of the fiery pits of hell, if those are our only motivations, then that doesn't really say a lot about our character as people. And so when I heard that, I sort of stepped back and said, now wait just a minute. But if you really think about the heart of that sentiment, isn't that true? That if the only reason we want to serve God is because A, we either are really desiring heavenly streets of gold, or B, it's just total and absolute fear of the darkness of hell, if those are our motivations, I think we're missing the very heart of the gospel. And the heart of the gospel is found in this passage. Behold what manner of love the Father has lavished on us or bestowed on us. Folks, the reason that we live a Christian life, the reason that we love God, the reason that we serve God is what we just sang. Because he first loved me. David, thank you for that song choice. And that's going to sort of lead us into our discussion tonight. I was asked at Camp Watoga last week to speak on the subject of being thankful and having gratitude. And they had contrasted that the night before with a discussion about not complaining so much. And listen, volumes, untold volumes could be written about the history of Christians and complaining. Any of you that have ever been involved in any church activity, any leadership position, anything in your life in church, you can relate to the fact that sometimes, a lot of times, all the time, there's complaining that's prevalent in churches. So we're not even going to go down that road. I remember a while back I did a lesson called Whining in the Wilderness that looked at the Israelites and their relationship with especially Moses during that time and all the whining and complaining. The most prevalent thing that jumps out to me in that narrative is they're sitting there and they've literally been starving to death. And God rains down this manna from heaven. And they eat and they gather it up and they're so happy. And then after a while, what do they say? All we got left is this nasty old manna. Can you imagine that you have craved chocolate cake your whole life? And then somebody makes a chocolate cake, and every day when you go into your kitchen, there's a big giant chocolate cake, and all you've got to do is cut a piece. And then you look at whoever made that chocolate cake and say, don't you know ever how to make any other dessert? And it's that attitude, that lack of gratitude that's so prevalent, I think, that makes us seem like we are complainers. And so that's another thought for another day, but I want to start this discussion by asking you a question. And I've seen this as a meme on social media a lot and had a lot of people send it to me, and I want to pose this question to you. If tomorrow you only woke up with the things that you thank God for today, what would you have? If tomorrow you woke up with only the things you had thanked God for today, what would you have? I think for a lot of us, it would be nothing, or it would be very little. Because I don't think that in life, and I'm not throwing this out there at you guys, this is a self-examination more than anything. We live our lives thinking that we're entitled to the things that we have in the world. And I'm talking about possessions, first off. We think that we're entitled to the cars and the houses and everything that we have and everything that we live with. And then we also think that we're entitled to things that are special privileges. I always laugh at people when they complain about roads. And listen, I know if you live down a rough road that the city's supposed to be maintaining, maybe that's frustrating. I've seen people go on rants this long on social media about one pothole in their road. And the response to that is this: go and visit a foreign country and see what the roads are like in most places in the world. Or in the summertime when the air conditioner quits and they can't get anybody right that minute to come and fix the air conditioner. The absolute rage within people. I remember there was a storm that came through a year or so ago, and people were without power for a day or so, and they just went on these long, epic, angry rants about Amicalola and Georgia Power and how they just weren't worth their salt. And I was thinking, man, the fact that you have power every day and indoor plumbing, we are a spoiled people. But how about this part of that? Are we thankful for our spiritual blessings? Are we thankful for all the things that we have and that we've been given and that God has provided? That as this passage that we read said, that God has lavished on us. There's a song that was written out of this text: behold, what manner of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the sons of God. And I hope that we focus on that and realize that. Leave a marker there in your New Testament and go back over to 2 Kings 5 in the Bible. 2 Kings chapter 5. Second Kings 5, we're going to read about a very important man. There's a guy there named Naaman, or as some people who really like to pronounce every syllable call him Naaman. I thought about doing that just to drive Maggie Painter crazy, but I won't do that to you, Maggie. It's Naaman. And Naaman is a military leader. We're going to start in verse 1 here in 2 Kings 5. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria. This is not only a military position, this is an important position within the government. Was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor. Man, aren't those some good descriptions of Naaman? He's a commander of the army of the king of Syria. He's great. He's honorable. He's mighty. He's a man of valor. Man, there's a 5-point sermon right there about how to be a great man just like Naaman. But a leper. Leprosy is talked about 68 times in the Bible, 55 of those in the Old Testament, 13 in the New. And leprosy is an awful, awful disease, especially in antiquity. Luckily, we don't deal with leprosy too much anymore. I think in the last survey, which was done about 2015, there were 250,000 cases of leprosy in the world, and most of those were in very impoverished countries. As recently, though, as the 1980s, there were still several million, I think over 5 million cases, but luckily we've been able to heal that and eradicate it in most industrialized nations. And so certainly that's something to be excited about. But in the first century, leprosy was a debilitating disease. It's a bacteria that attacks the nervous system, similar to tuberculosis. And whenever you go and have a TB test, you know how serious that is and how serious the health department takes that. It's spread by two things, either skin contact or respiratory droplets. And so if someone accidentally in a conversation let some saliva get on you, or if you made physical contact with the skin, that could be spread. And so as a result of that, lepers could not live with the rest of society. And as we're going to look at a passage in the New Testament, we see how significant that was. But lepers were forced to live in a colony with other lepers. And if you were diagnosed with leprosy, you had to stay at least 6 feet away from the closest person. So that's about as tall as I am if I laid down away from the person. That's maybe from me to Miss Ann, it may be a little farther than 6 feet, but you could not be any closer than that to another person. And if the wind happened to be blowing that day, you couldn't be within 150 feet of another person. And now for some of you, that doesn't sound like a big deal, right? Morgan Painter back there, she's not a hugger. If you go to give her a hug, she's stiff as a board. It's not really a fun thing to do, so I sort of give her a pat on the back when I see her. You know, some people are not huggers. They're not like that. They kind of avoid that physical contact. Some of you are like that. Some of you, when you go out the door on Sunday, I can see you walking like this a mile away because you don't want to hug. That's okay. I'm not like that. I'm a hugger. I hug people the first time I meet them. That's just naturally the way the Lord made me, I guess. But you might say, well, I could deal with that. I don't need that physical contact. Imagine never touching another human being as long as you live. Imagine that. Never holding a little baby at church who's standing up, even though she's not big enough to be standing up yet. But imagine never having anybody pat you on the back or shake your hand or give you a warm embrace. Imagine nobody ever being able to touch your face or cut your hair or ever have any contact with you. It's a miserable life, and that's what lepers had to deal with. And so Naaman here, even though he was a mighty man of God, even though he was an important man, even though he had won a lot of battles, he was diagnosed with a disease. A little bit more about leprosy, if you're interested in this. When you have leprosy, tumors develop on your skin and on your respiratory tract. So you develop tumors all the way up and down your respiratory system. And maybe most disturbing is the fact that patients lose all feeling due to the nerve damage. So even if someone was to come up and touch you, you wouldn't be able to feel it at all. I read a story once of a missionary who was serving a leper colony in the mid-1900s, and he was there and he was preaching to them and talking to them, and he said that he was getting the coffee ready one morning in his office, and he missed the cup, and this scalding hot coffee poured right onto his bare foot. It took him a few seconds to realize that he didn't notice that he hadn't felt it. And that's when he realized that he had caught leprosy and been diagnosed with the same thing. And imagine never being able to feel and being just hideously disfigured and never having people want to be around you and people looking at you and being disgusted, and you're not even allowed in town and you can't be within 6 feet of people. And we read about Naaman. The Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife, and she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who's in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who's from the land of Israel." And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I'll send a letter to the king of Israel." And it goes on, and of course the king reads it, and down in verse 8, "So it was when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king, saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, and he shall know that there's a prophet in Israel.'" And then Naaman went with his horses and chariot, in verse 9, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a message to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean." And we know that Naaman is healed of his leprosy. And we turn to the New Testament, over to the book of Luke. And this is just for those of you that want a little bit of extra study. If you want to read about how lepers were treated in the Old Testament, you can go and read Leviticus chapter 13. It gives you a better account of that. Luke 17 is where we'll be for the rest of our time this evening. This is, to me, some of the richest text in all the Bible, starting, I guess, in Luke 15, where we read about the three parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son. And then in chapter 16, the parable of the unjust steward, and then the rich man and Lazarus. And then you get to 17 and you read about the lepers being cleansed. You get to 18, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And Luke is just full of very rich lessons. But here, starting in verse 11, we see Luke 17. Now it happened as he went through Jerusalem that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. Now this would have been an interesting route to have been taken. Jesus is from Galilee, of course, but Galilee had not received him very well, particularly Nazareth. That's why Jesus said a prophet is without honor in his hometown. And then Samaria is not a place that a Jew would have spent any time. You can go all the way back to 1 Kings 12 and read about the rift between Jew and Samaritan. That's why we get the context of the parable of the Good Samaritan. But it started all the way back when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdoms of Israel and took them into captivity. But many remained there and intermarried with the Assyrians and other groups and armies that came in. And so when the true children of Israel, the tribe of Judah and Jerusalem, was conquered by the Babylonians, and they were sent off into captivity, and then they came back to rebuild, that it was always the people that had taken the name Samaritan at that point and who had their capital city there, who always caused trouble. And we read about in the book of Nehemiah, people building the wall with one hand and holding a sword with the other. Some of those attackers were the Samaritans. And so there's a deep history of hatred between Jews and Samaritans. This went as far as military battle and the temple being destroyed in Samaria. And so this is a very hostile relationship. So as he went through Jerusalem, he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee, and he entered a certain village. There met him 10 men who were lepers. And then this statement just jumps out to me. And I talked about this with the kids a little bit on Tuesday. It says, who stood afar off. Who stood afar off. Can you imagine their excitement? They'd heard all about Jesus, this man that could possibly have the power to heal, this great man who could be the Son of God and who at the very least was a rabbi, a teacher, and they see him coming, but they have to stand far away because they can't be near him. If we ever go and study what it was like to be a leper in antiquity, it's really a pitiful, sad situation. But they lifted up their voices. They screamed for Jesus. They pleaded with Jesus. They yelled for him. They said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And to me, I just imagine them humbly laying prostrate down on the ground saying, please show us some kind of mercy. We're living this awful life. We need saving. We need to be cured from this awful disease. When he saw them, he said to them, go show yourselves to the priest. So it was that as they went, they were cleansed. I love how matter-of-factly Luke writes that. They saw Jesus. Jesus told them to go show himself to the priest, and then they were clean. But here's the kicker, right, in verse 15. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God. Remember this same voice that had screamed and asked for mercy? 10 men had that scream, right? 10 men lifted up their voices and begged for mercy. But after the healing was done, only one could maintain that voice to praise and glorify God for the power that had been given to Jesus to cure him from his disease. And he fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. Listen, let me tell you, when it comes down to time to heal, when it comes down to matters of life and death, all these presuppositions that we have about race and ethnicity and how different we are from other people, that all goes away. None of that matters anymore when it comes down to life and death. And he didn't care that Jesus was a Jew. This was the man that had saved him. And so Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? You know, that's a question that I think we could probably ask a lot. Jesus gave his life for every person walking planet Earth. He served as a sacrifice for their sins. Where are they? He says, were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, arise, go your way, your faith has made you well. There's a very famous sermon. Several different preachers have preached a version of it called 10 healed but only 1 saved. That although these 10 men were healed from their physical infirmities, only one of them had the faith to be saved and have his sins taken away. That gratitude. So hopefully at some point we're already seeing ourselves in this story. Hopefully at some point we're already saying, well, I know that there's obviously a parallel between leprosy and sin. And obviously we're seeing that parallel that if leprosy and sin are the same thing and we're using it as an allegory, then it's the healing power of Christ that has the ability to cure our sin just as he had the ability to cure leprosy. And we could talk about that and discuss that, and that's there. But here's what we need to spend our time talking about in the rest of our time is, are we living a life of gratitude? Because it's really easy for us to stand up here and say, shame on those 9 lepers. I hope they get their disease back because they didn't go and thank Jesus, right? We're very indignant when we look at characters in the Bible. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we probably identify a lot more with the mistake-prone characters in the Bible than we do the faith-prone characters in the Bible. Wouldn't you agree with that statement? And so my question for us is, are we living like the 1 or are we living like the 9? Are we thankful for our blessings? Do we realize what's been done for us? Are we living, walking in the steps of Jesus? Are we living that grateful lifestyle that understands for God so loved the world and what happened that day on Golgotha's Hill? Are we living that way, or are we living like these 9 people who just realize, hey, somebody did something for me and I'm going to go and live however I want to? Are we living like the 9? I shared 4 points with the folks on Tuesday. I want to share those with you tonight, and then we'll be done. Number 1, if we want to be living this lifestyle, we need to be thankful for who God is. Thankful for who God is. In our elders meeting, elders and preachers meeting Wednesday night, Mark Pettit preached a sermon for us, which I always appreciate, about understanding who God is. And that has stuck with me all week, thinking about how to have that respect and that awe and that reverence for God. Because a lot of the mess and the junk that we get wrapped up in would be completely just abolished. We wouldn't even have to think about it if we understood who God is. If we understood what he's done for us and the love that he has for us. I mean, we were literally created, and we've talked about this year, for God's glory. I want you to imagine, and this is just my brain trying to comprehend this a little bit, that you had spent your entire life restoring something. We'll say a car. Gary Rittenberry's not here tonight, but Gary Rittenberry has in his house a prized possession. And it's a Bronco from the 1970s that he and Landon have restored, and it's beautiful. I'm trying to get him to let me drive it. It's not working so far, but I mean, it's just beautiful, and it's sitting there in his garage, and you go, and it's perfect. It's pristine. And anytime you go over there, he says, hey, come look at the Bronco. Gary, has it changed since the last time I saw it? No, but come look at it anyway. You know, that prized possession. And that's what he wants to talk about. That's where he spends his time polishing that thing. I mean, he loves it. That's what we are to God. Do you realize that? That when the heavenly council is assembled in that plane above the earth, and they're sitting there and God is boasting, God says, look at my creation. He looks at us and said, they belong to me. Look at what I've done. That's what God gets glory out of. Do we realize that? Man, how would that make us live if we had that as our understanding every day? That we are the special possession, as Peter called it, of God. We are what brings God glory. We're what God gave his only son for. He said, my creation, my special possession needs redeeming. They need reconciliation. And I love them, so I'll send my only begotten son. Man, we've got to realize who God is. We also have to realize, though, as Paul wrote to the Romans, that we're subject to both the kindness and the severity of God. That while God loves us unconditionally and beyond our imagination and comprehension, he also deals with sin severely. And that if we don't live lives that show how grateful we are, when our time is over, God will separate himself from us. And as the Bible said, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Number two, we got to be thankful for our small blessings. We got to be thankful for the little things in life. I use this illustration with our teenagers, and then again on Tuesday night. We take 23,000 breaths every day. 23,000 breaths. And never even think about it until they become harder for us. Just think about when the last time you paused and said, hey, I'm breathing today. Or when's the last time you stopped and said, my heart is beating today. I fell asleep last night in the recliner at our house looking at the lesson for this morning, and Carla got up, and I guess I just sensed something. I opened my eyes, and there she was in my face. I remembered my heart was beating right then. I mean, and it beat for about 45 minutes after that really fast. But how many of you think about how your feet work, or how your knees function, or how your elbows work? Injure one of those things, and that's all you'll think about for the next little while. We have to be thankful for the things even that we don't notice. We need to be thankful for those small blessings. James 1:17 says that every good and perfect gift comes from where? Comes from above. Thirdly, we've got to be thankful no matter what our circumstances are. Thankful no matter what our circumstances are. I am a maybe annoyingly positive person. But all of us have moments when we're down. All of us have moments that are hard. Every one of us has doubts and fears and worries and struggles. The Bible says there's no temptation except such as common to man. We all share the same ones. You might think you're the only person going through something. I promise you're not. I'll have people come and sit down in my office with their head in their hands, and they'll say, I can't believe it as a Christian, I'm struggling with this. And I never would share this because of confidentiality, but I can name a dozen other people in the church who are dealing with the exact same situation. You are not alone in that. And so what we've got to do is be thankful in spite of our circumstances. If we're a person who turns away from God every time something gets difficult, what kind of person are we? That's why Jesus turned to those guys who were having a panic attack in the middle of a storm, and he woke up and stilled the sea and said, why do you have such little faith? Why are you so doubting? Why are you scared of a thunderstorm when you have the Son of God sitting right there with you? Folks, why are we afraid when we have God and we wear the title of his Son, Christian? That's why the Bible tells us we don't have to fear. And then the final thing is this, and we could spend so much more time talking about this, but we need to be thankful for Jesus Christ. That is where all of our blessings come from. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Makes me think about Psalm 90, the beginning of that. This is Moses writing in Psalm 90, right? And he says, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And in that same psalm, he says, of course, teach us to number our days so that we can gain a heart of wisdom. We need to be very much aware of what Christ has done. And that will change the direction that we shape our lives in. We've got to be aware of that. I watched a TED Talk the other day. I watched a TED Talk. I don't do that a lot. These are these talks where you have one person and they stand in the middle of a stage kind of on a circle and just talk to an audience. And they have them for a variety of different situations. One of the most interesting ones I watched from a few years ago was Monica Lewinsky talking. If you remember, she was the woman that had, or at least one of the many women that had an affair with President Clinton. And this was the first time that she had ever shared her story. It's fascinating. And it's just them standing there talking, usually not even a podium around, just them talking. And so I was sort of looking for some different things about being thankful. And I'm a person that I will watch and read and listen to anything that has to do with the Bible. Getting ready for our Father's Day sermon this morning, I watched a whole sermon by T.D. Jakes about fatherhood, and I watched him scream into that camera for 30 minutes, and I was glued to it. Certainly there was a lack of biblical foundation, but it was entertaining if nothing else. But this guy that was talking was a monk, a modern-day monk. And he had on the garb and the outfit and the socks with sandals, and he was talking about being thankful. And he made this statement, and this really, I guess I've never thought about this before. Maybe you have. He said, we are not grateful because we're happy. He says, our gratitude is not because we're happy. We're not these happy people, and then we say, man, look how happy I am, so I'll be grateful. He says, we're not grateful because we're happy. We're happy because we are grateful. I hope that stuck with y'all, Spencer, when it was said the other night. Because, man, it really changed. We're not grateful because we're happy. We're happy in life because we've learned to be thankful. That's why Paul said, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I'm going through. He said, I've lived in every possible situation, but I've learned to be content in it, whether rich or poor or hungry or full, whatever we've gone through. We're not grateful because we're happy. We're happy because we're grateful. Hope we'll hold on to that. I want to share one passage with you and then share a story with you, and we'll be done. 1 Chronicles 29. I do realize that's the third time I've said we'll be done. I'm aware of that. That's an old preacher trick. First Chronicles 29. I rediscovered this passage at Thanksgiving a couple years ago. I was putting together one of our Thanksgiving services and was thinking about passages about gratitude, and this one was included. I think Ryland Cochran read this for us a couple years ago, and it's been a passage that I've really tried to meditate on ever since. 1 Chronicles 29, starting in verse 10. Therefore David blessed the Lord before all the assembly, and David said, this is David standing up before the assembly of the people of Israel. He says, blessed are you, Lord, God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness, the power, and the glory, the victory and the majesty. For all that is in heaven and in earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head over all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. In your hand is power and might. In your hand it is to make great and to give strength to all. And now, therefore, our God, we thank you, and we praise your glorious name. If David, the great king of Israel, here this is towards the end of his reign and of his life, if he can stand before the entire assembly as the exalted king and the mightiest warrior and the slayer of giants and the man who could kill animals with his bare hands, if he could stand there as the man after God's own heart and make this statement of praise and gratitude, how can we not live that same life? There was a young man who was getting ready to graduate college. And his dad had asked him, son, what do you want for your Graduation, he said, Dad, I want a new car. The father was wealthy, he could have afforded the new car, and so the son thought that's what he was getting. So graduation day came and the ceremony was over, and the dad called the young man into his study there, and he had a box. And that son said, oh boy, I'm getting a new car. And he handed his son the box, and he opened it, and there was a leather journal with his name engraved on the front. And he opened it up and saw the blank pages, and the boy was furious. He said, Dad, you knew what I wanted, and you gave me this journal. And he slammed it down on his desk, and he walked out. And he didn't talk to his dad for a long time. The young man went on to be successful. He had his own business. He was very wealthy and prominent in society and had his own family. And he started to, as he aged, realize the mistake that he'd made. And he said, I really need to go and make things right with my dad. And so as he was contemplating those things, the phone rang, and it was someone in his family that said, your dad has passed away. And so he went back to settle the estate and handle the family business. And as he was cleaning out his dad's office, he noticed that journal still sitting on his dad's desk. And so with all the regret that you can imagine in your life, he opened up that journal, and as he got to one of the back pages, a set of keys fell out. It was the keys to a new car, and on the tag it said paid in full. Can you imagine the heartache and the heartbreak that he felt? And I think the message of that story is twofold. Number one, we need to be thankful no matter what before it's too late. We don't need to learn things the hard way like that boy did in that story. And here's the second thing. We need to realize that our ultimate gift has been paid in full in the form of Jesus' sacrifice. And we're foolish, just like that boy, if we're not taking advantage of that. I can't imagine us living our whole lives forsaking the sacrifice that was made on the cross and then standing before the judge one day and hearing it was all paid in full, but now it's too late. Those are some of the scariest words in the English language, aren't they? Too late. But thankfully, it's not too late tonight. If there's something you need to make right in your life, it's not too late. You can come forward tonight and do that. If you have not made the decision to become a Christian, and you've been thinking about that, tomorrow might be too late, but tonight's not. We have this opportunity set aside just for you to do what you need to do before it's too late as we stand and sing this song together.